before I get into today's webinar and the, how to accelerate requirement capture and sign-off of elements as a training session, I do want to talk a bit about why is that absolutely important. We've recently did some study that I think is worth sharing. So first of all, and this is not our data, this is from Boston Consulting Group's report from 4 years ago now. But generally speaking, successful IT projects are extremely rare. By IT project, we mean pretty much any change that involves new technology, changing your systems, introducing new systems. As much as 1 in 4 are reported to be complete and utter failures that do not bring about any positive change to the business. But these are big projects, right? And a lot of our customers do kind of an ongoing org management, not necessarily, introducing big new systems every other Friday. So we actually looked at that data. We analyzed anonymously, randomly, the same data we used to visualize in our product for Salesforce org models. We looked at some insights across 100 random orgs. And what we have found out that about 1 in every 3 custom objects you create in Salesforce, and these are not managed package objects, these are custom objects created by admins, architects, get absolutely no usage. Are we talking 0 records? Not a few records, not a bit, 0. And if you look at custom fields that we end up creating in Salesforce for our business stakeholders, again, not fields installed through managed packages, fields we end up creating ourselves, about 45% hold no records whatsoever. And that's actually pretty big number if you think about it. It means anything between a third of all of our efforts, because let's be honest, a lot of things end up around objects, fields, and automations that touch those. Well, that means pretty much 1 in 3 things we try to deliver on Salesforce platform ends up not really bringing any adoption, any business impact. So building the right thing, or actually not building the right thing, is probably the biggest hidden cost of running any system, including Salesforce. Well, we found out it doesn't have to be. Customers who use, and ourselves included, like the full suite of change intelligence capabilities get much better result and much higher adoption of the different capabilities on their Salesforce platform. We see ourselves as a change intelligence platform, and what that means to us is we want to provide our customers ability to learn about the business and system configuration, and then ability to apply that knowledge to best decide how to implement planned change. And what we see over and over again, and I even books about that, I would strongly recommend How Big Things Get Done. Massive, the biggest book ever published on project management, early 2023. And the biggest finding was, well, precisely that why a lot of projects and changes fail has to do with the fact that people don't do enough planning and analysis, period. It all comes down to people get requirements, feature requests from the business, and off they go, very quickly trying to implement it. Whereas if more time was spent actually doing more proper analysis of what is actually required, more projects would end up in success. And I speak about that because that's just full context for everyone about what is the general vision and purpose of the Elements platform. Today, the purpose of today's webinar in particular, what I want to focus on is kind of that area over here. How can you use Elements to capture and validate your business requirements, do analysis, and come up with very distinct list of work items as quickly as possible? Because that's another thing. It's not that we don't want to do it. It's that historically doing that sort of analysis is a very time-consuming process, and that's not something we always have time to do. So we will cover how to accelerate it. All right. So getting into the purpose of today's webinar, how to actually accelerate requirement capture and sign-off. And I've pretty much free capabilities, free components of that Elements helps with. Visual analysis. So if you really utilize and bet on business process diagrams using UPN notation, you're pretty much creating a very visual story map, something to really engage with your stakeholders, something that communicates clearly what needs to be built, what is required. With the diagram or elements GPT, which is still currently in beta, but about to be released in the coming weeks, you can actually automate or actually accelerate that process quite significantly. And I will show you that a bit later during this webinar. And then finally, complete requirements. So rather than having tickets or work items that, just separate records that often lack context, meaning you can, again, use your visual diagrams to anchor them, to complete them, to make sure they're actually complete work items and nothing is missed. Okay, so that's kind of actually what in terms of the structure of the workshop or the webinar today, more of a workshop than a webinar, I suppose. First, I want to cover some theory around business process diagrams. And then what I want to do is I will demo my screen, share my screen, and I want to actually show you how we're using Elements internally. And we have a project that we're running right now. And I will want to kind of show you as much as I can of using this in practice on a very specific project internally. All righty. So let's kind of talk about UPN process mapping. The reason I want to start with that is before we go, oh, we can automate business process diagrams in UPN and get all excited. I want to make sure we all actually on the same page and all of our customers on the same page as well. Why is that exciting? Why is this valuable? Lack of detail in our analysis, in our diagramming, is killing stakeholder engagement and feature adoption. The reason is if your diagram doesn't capture the detail, you are going to miss out on the details. If stakeholders do not understand what the detail is, kind of what the solution you're pitching them, they cannot intelligently engage. Without engagement, there is no feedback. Without feedback, the real requirements cannot be truly finalized. You might get some business stakeholders, yeah, what you're roughly describing roughly makes sense. But the problem is that, at some point after the release, during the process, they will go, well, actually, we forgot about this, or actually, that's not what we expected. And either you end up doing reworks or, complaints that this isn't what was expected. It's the whole thing. So that's where universal process notation as a methodology comes in, because in the world of business process diagramming, UPN is simplest to draw, fastest to learn in its entirety. We'll cover that. Easiest to understand to the widest audience, arguably most powerful method of mapping, and hence the name universal. When we talk about UPN diagrams, in essence, all we are talking about is this block over there. We just use one box and one line. It's a verb-based activity, describes what happens. We have arrows coming in and out, so-called flow lines. If it's coming in, it's an input or a trigger for a decision. And the output is, why are we doing it? What are we hoping to achieve? And resources, which pretty much cover who is performing the action and potentially in what systems or using what technology. It's as simple as that. And if you look at the UPN diagram not as an individual block, but as a whole, all it is that. Obviously, your diagrams may end up being more complex than that. A lot of ours are more complex than that, but it's the same shape over and over again. Let's cover some of these attributes in more detail. Activity, so this is pretty much what we mean by this verb-based activity, the text in the box, must be phrased as an active verb, send, review, approve. It must specify the object of an action. So like send email, review proposal, approve vacation request. And it has to be concise. Think about the headline, not a whole tweet or an essay. And the reason why I'll reveal in a second. The resources at the bottom, they either represent, again, who, so roles responsible for performing the activity, or again, systems that we're using to perform that activity. Now let's talk about inputs outputs, because this is where I think the power of UPN really is at its most. Every activity must lead to a distinct verifiable outcome. And this is, from my experience doing UPN diagrams or business process diagrams for many years now, this is where the most mental effort actually goes. Doing boxes and resources usually is fairly simple and quick. Why are we doing it? What do we hope to achieve? What is the distinct verifiable outcome is the most difficult thing to capture at times. And the reason is, you're trying to capture the rationale for why we're doing the activity. And also, as you saw earlier when I had the whole diagram, it acts as a catalyst for the next activity. So in other words, outcome of one activity becomes an input for another. Let me give you an example. We say never used past tense on an outcome because it actually introduces circular logic. It doesn't lead to distinct verifiable outcome. Send email and the outcome is email sent. Well, that doesn't make any sense, does it? It's like we're sending emails just to send emails, or we're capturing contacts, so contacts get captured. There's more to it. What we're trying to capture is, where is it captured? What information are we looking to capture? What is the value of us doing that? If we capture that, we are much more aware of, what is the actual requirement. If you think about what we're trying to capture with these boxes, this is how we, this is the outcome we're trying to achieve. This is just the means to get it. So really getting detailed on the outcome is key to success. The unique emphasis in UPN on verifiable outputs is actually what sets apart this methodology from any other notations. And we'll cover that in just a second. The final thing which you can also use in the tool is, and this is why it doesn't make sense to put that much detail inside the box itself, you can add attachments, you can add notes, links, you can pretty much add additional information for how something gets performed just as a richer note. Because remember, the diagram is meant to basically highlight and communicate to whoever's reading it what is happening, what is the next step. But if they want to learn more, and if the procedure is a bit more complicated than that, you can then rely on these additional links and notes to communicate that complexity. UPN diagrams, the way I look generally on business analysis, if you cannot answer what specific activities are performed, who performs those activities, what is the desired business outcome or success criteria, and under what conditions that activity is performed, then you do not really understand what is going on. And I have seen this over and over again where solutions get built and there are some diagrams created. But if you then engage with the diagrams and what is captured, a lot of the times, a lot of these details are missing. Product evaluation box on a screen. It happens. But who does that? Where? How the information is logged? What are the conditions? No clue. But generally magic happens, and then we move on to something else. It's the level of detail is always very often missing in how people diagram. So I've thrown a lot of theory at you, and it might seem a bit preachy. Apologies for that. I am a bit of a UPN evangelist, which means, and ask my wife, never ask me to talk about processes because I'll never shut up. But to put all that theory into kind of a demonstrable practice, let me give you an example. So why am I so passionate about the detail and following some of these best practices around UPN? So this is an example of a flowchart. I've taken it from a company that actually offers certifications in flowcharting and BPMN. One of the flowcharts on their website kind of demonstrating a good example of a good flowchart. So let me what we see, we have a bunch of different boxes. We have a legend which tells us actually what each color means. In this case, each color means a different resource or a different person, or a person in a different role performs it. Seems to make sense. So let me just zoom in at the beginning, because I could do the whole diagram, but I've been told that this would take too long, and apparently people might not be as excited about this as I am. So let me just do the beginning. So at the beginning of this diagram, what do we see? A sales dev conducts initial qualification call. And it seems that if I'm interpreting this diagram without someone explaining it to me, what I'm interpreting is that it seems like two things can happen simultaneously. A sales dev sets lead status to archive and follow up tasks if needed, or AI qualification, discover call, and evaluation plan is logged. Now, from the context, I kind of can guess that this is an or as opposed to an and statement. So based on some conditions, they either archive a prospect or they perform further qualification discover call. What is interesting, though, is that a different person seems to perform the exact same action. I mean, this is what this diagram is really telling me. I have two activities which are exactly the same, performed by two different people. So either this is a beautifully demonstrated example of complete waste of time, or there is some big difference between what sales development versus partner services person does with that prospect. And then obviously we've got the fit. Is it a fit for us? And if I go back to the previous diagram, a very simple yes and no. We don't particularly understand the rationale behind it. Let's compare that, and I did some work to try to capture the exact same diagram, but in UPN. The difference is I obviously don't know the exact business context, so I kind of tried to fill in the gaps as much as I could. So lead registers interest with the product. Somehow that's where that comes from is a separate conversation. A sales development person conducts initial qualification call, and we have two outcomes. Lead is either not mature enough to need the product, or lead seems to fit the target market. And if they're not mature enough, we set the lead status to archived, and the result of it is what? It's not just, it's archived and nothing happens. We have a follow-up task set up in Salesforce to see if lead may fit in the future. Now, let's focus on that for a second. So in the previous diagram, when it said, sales dev sets lead status to archive and follow tasks if needed, we don't really know what is the expected outcome if needed, maybe all the time, maybe some of the time. We don't know the rationale. In this case, we know exactly, more importantly, we also know where the tasks will be logged, and potentially I can check additional details to find out more about how this operation gets performed. Equally, prepare evaluation plan. What is the outcome? Questions to ask during the discovery specific to each situation. If I then conduct discovery call, leads, needs, challenges, goals documented in Salesforce somehow. You can already see the level of detail that's captured, even in such a simple process, is starkly different. It's very simple to read. I don't think anyone needs much explanation to follow the logic. And more importantly, if we were using a diagram like this to analyze our requirements, what is actually needed from Salesforce or whatever other platform to support our business process, right here, we would, for instance, quickly know, okay, we've got needs, challenges, goals documented in Salesforce. Okay, is that 3 new custom fields on some new object or on account or opportunity? This kind of detail the capturing of the detail already helps us kind of highlight the potential solutions we might need to implement to support it. So a few advantages of UPN. Less is more. We have very few symbols, very few colors, no need for a legend. The methodology is geared towards understanding the purpose, not just what happens. You see, with flowcharts, it's often the case that you go, this happens, then that happens. but very rarely do we actually capture why are we capturing, doing all those activities, and why, and what are we trying to achieve. UPN is very opinionated on that, in the sense that no, you have to capture why you're performing all those different activities. Standardize, again, every flowchart looks a bit different, different colors, different shapes. You always have to kind of explain it, add a legend. With UPN, not so much. It's always the same picture. It's always the same symbols, the same methodology. You can also create smaller, more concise diagrams thanks to hierarchy, but I'll show you that in a second. And most importantly of all, you can do it very quickly. A, because you don't have to learn, like with flowcharts or BPMN, the whole notation. Two, and what I'll show you in a moment, with Diagram GPT, you can actually accelerate and automate some of that already. I've just scratched the surface of kind of UPN best practices and methodology. If you want to learn more, we have a very good detailed course on fit gap analysis, are we calling it, which covers the UPN and more advanced use cases, which I strongly recommend you visit, you register, which will be quite helpful. What I really wanted to cover so far is just to establish some baselines, some fundamentals for all of the participants. So when I'm about to start doing what I'm planning to do, it all makes sense to everyone. Before I get into my practical demonstration, there's an additional thing I want to highlight is in Element, you can capture your stories, your business requirements in context of the diagram. And it's, to me, not just a feature. It's actually extremely, extremely fundamental to what we do. I don't think good process diagramming is separate from creating work items. Good process diagramming leads to complete stories and requirements. It is not separate. It is the act of creating good work items. Now, I use the word work items because I know some people use stories and requirements. Other people use tasks that they call slightly differently, including tasks, right? So methodologically, we can all debate on how do we actually capture the work that needs to be done on our systems. But however you call them, the point stands, whatever the format, whatever the notation you use, doing good process diagramming, doing good analysis leads to complete picture, to complete stories. And one final thing I do want to add, especially for those who do use user stories, which I found to be extremely eye-opening perspective on our diagramming. It's that the methodology itself is not only simple, I would say, but if you really look at the structure of the box itself, it actually mimics one of the user story. Let's look at it. It's like, what happens, who performs, why are we doing this? If you just phrase these questions differently, it's when something happens, as a user, I want to do something with a particular tool so that it can accomplish a very specific result. So you can think of your UPN diagrams to a certain degree as a visual representation of your stories, or a story map. That's why it's so powerful, rather than having, and that's how we use it internally. Every capability we build in Elements starts as a kind of a story map or a business process diagram. And when we work with developers on those, it's not just a backlog of separate tickets. We can actually say this ticket is needed because this step and this step. And we can actually demonstrate how all of those tickets fit together in a kind of coherent user journey. So this is a real life demonstration, and I haven't actually prepared anything other than we have an actual requirement sitting in our backlog. We were just discussing it with Jack, our VP of Operations, earlier today. And the general idea is we on the product team use a tool called Gainsight PX to analyze and understand how customers use our product. That's how we can identify who are the power users, that particular user journeys that don't work, or where people fall off, or things like that, people who have tried a feature then never came back. So we can pretty much understand how our product is performing across different areas. And the revenue team or the customer success team in particular would very much like to have access to some of this data so they can identify accounts that are at risk, or customers who might not be getting enough value, so they can more proactively reach out. The customer success best practice, if you will. So we have this requirement. Now we have we spent some work with Jag going through technical implementation. So first and foremost, what I've now opened is our system landscape diagram. Just so you know, we have this architecture menu item, processes menu item, and these are business process diagrams. These are our architecture, Salesforce architecture diagrams, to be more precise. And the biggest one we have is our entire system landscape. Let me just go to a draft version of it just to be clear. This is where we document how all of our systems fit together. And actually, we can create the concept of a drill down or child diagram. So that's one of the powers of Elements, if you haven't used it already, is rather than trying to cram everything into one screen, you can create lower level diagrams to capture more detail as a separate diagram. This actually lends itself very nicely to Salesforce architecture diagrams. If you're using that notation, they also have a concept of hierarchy, where at level 1 you have like kind of a system landscape kind of picture with a bit of detail, and then you kind of reveal more detail in lower levels. But instead of having many separate diagrams, you can all anchor it in one place. So for us, if I want to learn anything about kind of Gainsight system and configuration, all I have to do is go to this diagram, because I know Gainsight box is there, and I can navigate down, and I would reveal a bit more about this particular setup, and I can drill down even further, and then I can either, if we want to understand the data model of the product, or I can look at how we're kind of thinking about designing our architecture on how this integration could work and what data and where we would like to expose. Now, the thing is that looking at the technical documentation and looking at what is possible with the tool, we were able to figure out some technical requirements or technical stories. Like, we know roughly, what data we can expose, on, how to do it on account object and how to schedule the integration. It doesn't seem like it's possible to do on an individual contact level. So that's why we have a couple of stories that are not sure if needed. So the technical implementation is actually, or will be, relatively simple. The thing that we've been wondering about is, how do we make it actually useful, and how do we make this work? So no one has particularly strong opinion on the matter, and the idea was for Jag to come up with a proposal. It's like, this is how I propose we could then run a process of using this data and using it as a business, as a customer success team. So he's going to do that work. I'm not going to interfere with that at all. But let's just pretend I'm Jack for our marvelous VP of operations just for next 20 minutes. Now, what I could do is create a new map, a business process map, and how do we call this requirement? Let's say evaluate product usage by accounts and take corrective actions, maybe. Now I could just potentially, well, if you have, that's we will get into the description. But now I because I have as a beta user myself, one of the perks of being VP of product, I can click the auto-generate capability. So what will happen now is I can actually give a description, but also give instructions to Elements GPT to generate a very specific diagram based on my instructions. So let's very quickly give what is the intent? The process that covers customer success managers, analyze and account managers, presumably evaluating account product engagement and taking action if some accounts show signs of dropping retention or usage. That's the general description. And what's the instruction? I don't know. Generate a diagram following best practices on how product usage data should be utilized in identifying at-risk accounts. List activities that CSMs should take to remedy accounts that are not using the product or not using it at the level that is expected. I'm guessing. This is not my area at all. So this is the best I could kind of come up with. Okay. Oh, and by accounts. Okay. Fair enough. Okay. And since we're going to wait a second, well, probably 2 minutes for the diagram to be generated, let me quickly go and see whether there are any questions people have posted in the meantime.
So I can see a question just regarding training resources. So what materials are available and would you recommend for people that are wanting to get better at UPN?
So 2 things on that. One is we have Elements Academy, which I've shared the kind of QR code, the link to before. You can just go Academy Elements Cloud. That's one. We are actually doing a lot of work right now with one of the teams to do more training, to create more training content and actually provide even some certifications and then practical exercises around UPN. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of material available. Well, technically the diagram just generated, so let's look at what was generated. Collect product usage data collected. Okay, we still have a kind of a circular logic element here, so we'll correct that. Analyze usage patterns, identified risk accounts, develop the engagement plan, execute engagement activities. Okay, I mean, it is something. And here's the thing. One thing that we also want to articulate. We continue improving the prompts and the logic. One of the ones we're trying to correct right now with GPT generation is there is a tendency for AI to create kind of circular, what I said isn't the best practice, right? Collect product usage data collected. But as much as it is definitely not a perfect UPN diagram, it is at the very least a framework which we can now use to correct. Forgive me for a second. I'm just going to change the theme of this diagram since I much rather, I prefer kind of a darker color scheme. Okay, so in our case, we know already that data coming from PX. We don't actually collect product usage data. This maybe stages is already automated, so I'm going to delete that. And again, with the usage patterns, okay, that's an interesting, let me just move these things around a little bit. Okay. Analyze customer success manager, analyze usage patterns. I don't particularly agree whether this is this step. The way I would probably phrase that is analyze or review usage across accounts assigned to me. And that I think is much more discrete and specific activity. We also know that this will be happening in Salesforce. Okay, so what is the outcome we're actually trying to achieve here? Well, CSM can spot which accounts are underutilizing the product compared to their goals. Okay, and I'm going to very quickly just pause right here because, as I said before, let me just move to stories for a second. That's a different project. That's our Jira one. So the stories that we have today are very technical. Create certain custom fields, set up the data sync. Very technical. We actually haven't come up with any stories on how are the business stakeholders supposed to engage with this data. Now, let's just really focus on that very first activity that I've documented. Reviews usage across accounts assigned to me. And again, stated goals. If we really think about what is the implication here, we need to have ability to capture in our system what the different accounts or different customers are supposed to be using or we expect them to be using, right? Otherwise, across a wide set of features and capability, if we just show them a report, they might not particularly understand whether the fact that customer has 0 in that column is good or bad, expected or unexpected. So potentially, we might even leave a note for if we're showing this to stakeholders later on. How do CSMs know what is good or bad, right? When we will be showing this diagram later to a team of internal stakeholders, again, we can show the diagram to begin with, and then toggle some sticky notes on and off to then show, okay, a couple of questions about this process. If everyone is okay with that, let's now get into that detail. Okay, you identify at-risk accounts. Yeah, the input is, we know these are the list of accounts that we know what they're using and we know what they're supposed to be using or we are expecting them to be using. We know what the gaps are. So that allows us pretty much to identify at-risk accounts. Great. Well, actually, we can ask ourselves the question: is this supposed to be automated? While we add it. Now, when we identify at-risk accounts, what happens precisely? Do we count, let's say for the second account marked as at risk by a CSM, for instance? Yeah, I think that actually is a very distinct outcome. What we already know and can deduce from just that activity is, assuming I wouldn't be creating stories at this point before we had a chance to sit down with stakeholders and get some engagement. But let's say for a second that they look at this diagram and they go, yeah, loving it. That's exactly how we want to work. But the value is now when I create a story, pretty much I can, let me just close that and move slightly to the side. this story is pretty much this activity. Identify at-risk accounts as a customer success manager. I want to be able to, well, is it identify now that I think about it, or mark? Yeah, let's leave identify, and then identify, mark at-risk accounts so that we know which accounts we need to take action against to reduce, or actually not so much reduce as fight churn. And well, this is a very clear, we know we need a new field on an account called at risk, maybe up for discussion, that is editable by CSMs. And this is just an example. This is about, talking about a complete analysis and creating complete stories, complete work items. And if I now zoom out, show the right panel, it's there. And the value of that is, I can tell you, when we sat down this morning, and just for the clarity, this might not be what we end up developing, just to be clear. I'm just playing the role of a business analyst today. But when we were sitting down this morning with Jack to discuss what we might do in this area, at no point did we ever think about, or it never occurred to me that we might be adding a field like that, or that might be relevant at all. We were thinking about how the data will move between two systems, what custom fields we need, and then when the integration will be scheduled. Very technical conversation. But now that we're thinking about how this would end up being used, and how it might end up being used, going step by step, we can identify, we might need a field here, and we might need a report there. And if we want to perform this activity, it feels like we should probably build something here as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if by the time we're finished diagramming this out and getting some stakeholder engagement, we might end up creating 5, 6, 8 additional stories, each one carrying some fields, some reports, or some other configuration to help make this really, really work. The other thing that I would like to point out around accelerating that analysis, and how quickly did it take me? We clicked to generate a diagram, was answering some questions. I could have gotten some coffee in the meantime. For me to identify potentially a few technical user experience requirements coming from that diagram by correcting a few details took literally a couple of minutes, and it would have taken much sooner if I wasn't so focused on kind of presenting and educating as I'm doing it. So it is extremely, extremely fast if you think about it. And the other cool thing about the diagram GPT capability is that, well, let's take one example here. What we said about the power of elements, you can have hierarchical diagramming. Well, we can also generate child diagrams, as opposed to, I can create a child diagram if I want to. I want to capture more detail. This area is great, but actually there's so much more happening here. So I can create it manually, double click on the canvas, add a couple of boxes, start filling them out, to capture more detail. But what I can also do, or will be able to do, is just auto-generate it, description, instructions. So adjust strategy as needed. Actually, let's do this one because I'm actually quite interested. Draw a diagram. Diagram should include all the best practices from customer success on how to develop an engagement plan with an at-risk customer. And once again, I can very quickly speed up and accelerate my workload just by allowing the combination of elements, and the power of AI to just, pretty much learn from everything that was written on the topic and come up with a proposed structure for me to work with. Because again, it is much easier to correct something than necessarily to stare at an empty canvas and try to build it from scratch, is what we're finding. Okay, I'm just going to wait for this diagram to generate in a moment. Oh, and by the way, this is the diagram that was generated for me. And again, it's small enough and not overwritten enough that I can actually go through each activity, each outcome, and kind of correct it and make sure it's actually much more detailed and follows much more of a best practice. I use it almost, well, not every day, but at least a few times a week. And I can tell you it takes a lot of cognitive load from my mind to be able to actually take a kind of a dirty draft of a business process diagram and kind of make it better myself. It saves a lot of time. We try to support the entire life cycle of change on the Salesforce platform. What we've covered today, although there's so much more we could do, but it is covered in a lot of video courses on our Elements Academy. It's kind of that area right here of taking some initial request, feature request ideas, projects, and defining very detailed work items. But it's just one area of everything we do. And as far as the AI capabilities that we're developing and will continue to develop this year, a lot of them are focused kind of around that planning analysis part of the life cycle.